Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Science Safdar, and you are listening to the Cloud Native.fm podcast hosted by Cloud Native Islamabad. I'm excited and thrilled to host this first show for you. This is very first beginning to this podcast, and today is February the 9th, 2021, and I record this first episode on Azure and Cloud Native with my guest, Mike Pfeiffer. Thanks again for tuning in to the episode 1 of Cloud Native.fm podcast. Every single week, I try to find cloud and cloud native experts, share updates and best practices, real-world use cases, deployment patterns, deployment strategies on container technologies include Docker, Containerd, Cryo, orchestration technologies include Kubernetes, Docker Swarm, Nomad, Cloud Native networking solution providers Cilium, Calico, Flannel, and Weave, Cloud Native storage provider NetApp, Ceph, Rook, and Commvault, Cloud Native monitoring and logging solution Prometheus, Grafana, Elasticsearch, Kibana, Fluentd, and more, Cloud Native deployment patterns, Cloud Native strategies. Contents from Cloud Native certifications include Certified Kubernetes Administrator, Certified Kubernetes Security Specialty, Certified Kubernetes Application Developer, GitOps tooling, deployment patterns, deployment strategies, serverless computing, and more. Today in this first episode, I'm going to discuss about this new cloud native wave, what this is, why it's keep on coming, what containers are, how do we leverage containers and Kubernetes in Azure, what is AKS, what that is, what are the best use cases to run apps on AKS, how to ramp up with cloud native skills on Azure, what's new coming in Azure cloud native ecosystem, where to find cloud native Azure cloud native community, and more. With my guest Mike Pfeiffer, he lives in Phoenix, Arizona, founder and CEO of CloudSkills.io, Microsoft Azure MVP, Ex-AWS employee, Pluralsight and Microsoft Press Author, host of the CloudSkills.fm podcast. So I hope you really enjoyed this episode and definitely check out Mike's CloudSkills.fm podcast. Awesome content available for you on Azure, AWS, GCP, DevOps, SRE, Cloud, and Cloud Native. And thanks again for tuning in, and let's go ahead and cut it over to the interview. Thanks, Mike, for sharing that for tonight your session. And this session is for Azure and cloud native stuff. For those people who doesn't know what cloud native are, what it is, why it's going to be so popular over the years, and why you need to worry about this kind of thing. So I have a guest. I found a guest which is very, very interesting for me. And I learned so much stuff from him. So I thought better to sit with him and showing these kind of things. So thank you, Mike. Over to you. And you can introduce yourself a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks a lot for having me on the show. Name's Mike Pfeiffer, Microsoft Azure MVP, founder and CEO of CloudSkills.io. And super excited to be here. I know that a lot of people are trying to learn cloud. I've been working in cloud for a long time. I've been in tech for over 20 years. I got into cloud starting in 2012. So I went over to work at AWS at the end of 2012, and I was at Microsoft at the time. So I was early on the cloud stuff, and I've helped lots of people over the last several years. It's been a fun learning process, and it's just the beginning. So we're just getting started.
Thanks, Mike. Really happy. And every content that you showed up is really, really interesting and really viable to anybody who is following you. And these Azure, Cloud Native, Cloud are ever evolving and ever adopting technologies. To keep up and wrap up with this technology is to find a good person in your connection. So everyone who's listening to us, I encourage you to follow Mike Pfeiffer on LinkedIn and Twitter. He's showing us some stuff that is really, really helpful for the beginner to the intermediate to the advanced level engineers. And he has some Azure Cloud Native Cloud Native DevOps Bootcamp is coming up, I think, in this month. So right. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, for anybody listening, I would love for you guys to follow me, but definitely follow Cloud Skills IO, our company, on LinkedIn, Twitter, because we do have like multiple authors now that are sharing. And so anyways, let me answer your question. Starting this week, we're kicking off a Cloud Native DevOps Bootcamp. This is a pretty ambitious bootcamp because we're doing both Azure and AWS. So we're focusing on cloud native patterns and practices. And we're doing it over 10 weeks. And we're doing something a little bit different this time because last year, in the last couple of years, we spent a ton of time helping people get certified. But one of the things we started to realize, and we're hearing from people, was that people were saying, hey, I got my certs, but I still not really sure like how to put this into practice to do the hands-on. So this new boot camp that we're doing actually starts in 2 days as we're recording this. So on February 10th, and it goes for 10 weeks. And it's a combination of recorded video and live sessions. And what we're trying to do is take people through a sequence of building 54 projects over that 10 weeks for a couple of reasons. Number one, to just absorb the material slowly. We've seen in the past in different classes where we could do like 3 days straight and people kind of walk out with, dazed look on their face. It's very overwhelming, right? So we're spreading the content out over a long period of time. We're doing more practical project focused lessons, and we're aiming this at complete beginners. There's a lot of people coming into cloud from IT, worked in systems administration, software development, or whatever, and are trying to learn these platforms for the very first time. And it's kind of scary. It's kind of intimidating. And the cloud native stuff is like a big departure from stuff that we used to focus on in the past. So it's really aimed at beginners. And our hope is that with the new format, it'll be a lot easier to absorb this material.
Thanks, Mike. I encourage everybody listening to us. This is a go-to place for you to learn Azure and cloud native stuff. And Azure Cloud Native is a very good job marketing, a very good opportunity for you to jump in the right time. And because this is ever growing and its future is very much in. And if you haven't heard about these technologies, everybody listening to us, I encourage you to take a look at it and show it up, and Mike will show you how you start your cloud native journey. So for the tonight's session on Azure and cloud native, so for the first question for Mike, how Azure help you to learn and help to learn and migrate your existing apps into the cloud, and especially in the cloud native domain.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a bunch of different options available in Azure. And one of the things you need to think about, going into it is not only the strategy, but which services are going to be a good candidate. When we talk about containers and orchestration, that's a new concept for a lot of people. And so it kind of depends. Like, are you doing a monolithic application, kind of old school, where everything's just like in one code base? Or is it like broken up into multiple services and you're doing the whole microservices thing? And that's a really ambitious, microservices is a really ambitious road to go down because, it takes a lot of maturity on the team. You have to be really, comfortable with the tools and services. And it's a different world because you got all these services interacting with each other. There's monitoring and troubleshooting and performance, all that kind of stuff is super important, and it's a different world. So anyways, in Azure, right, you kind of got to decide, am I doing a monolithic application or microservices? So if you wanted to transform an application, let's say, take a basic web app that's currently running on a VM, costing you a bunch of money, you want to kind of, modernize it by containerizing the app and getting it to run in Azure. If it's just one code base, kind of a monolithic thing, which is okay for some apps, you could run that in app service. So Azure App Service, insanely good service for running web applications. It's a platform as a service, managed service. And by the way, that's where at Cloud Skills, we run all of our stuff. So we run all of our stuff in app service because we're not really at the point yet where we need a ton of microservices. And so for us, it's a great fit. A couple of years ago, this was at Ignite 2019. I was talking to some of the folks from Microsoft, and they made that point too. And they were like, hey, listen, we got a bunch of our web properties that are just monolithic apps running an app service, So that's a really good place to start. If you don't want to like think about moving from on-prem into the cloud, just like taking a VM and moving that VM into the cloud, that's not really a migration, right? That's just taking a VM and moving it to another data center. But like really embracing something that's more cloud native would be, all right, let's take this app that's currently running on a VM, let's modernize it, let's put it in a container, and then let's run it in something like app service. That's one way. Another very common way to do like real small containerized workloads and just kind of like bring something up quick. They have container instances, ACI, Azure Container Instances over there. It's kind of like serverless containers, right? The idea is that you don't have to pre-provision any kind of managed infrastructure. You literally just go to Azure, make an API call or whatever, and say, hey, I need a container. Here's my image, and give me a running container. So you don't have to spin up any infrastructure. That's kind of interesting. And if anybody's familiar with AWS Fargate, it's kind of like that, right? And then going one step from there, if you are going to do microservices and really go big into Kubernetes and do the whole microservices thing, they have the Azure Kubernetes Service, AKS. That is a managed Kubernetes, just like you see over at the other cloud platforms. And it's funny because at my company, we've talked to a lot of teams in the Microsoft space that are trying this out. And it's just like a very big deal for a lot of teams. And it's easy to mess this up. And it's easy to kind of get into a project and then realize that, you may have overestimated your ability to like make it happen, right? So it's something that you need to take your time to work your way into. Definitely not saying don't do it, but I'm saying make sure you know what you're doing, because I've seen a lot of people burn a lot of time trying to do microservices when maybe they didn't need to, and on the other hand, I've seen companies, especially if you look at big companies, right, like big SaaS platforms and stuff, microservice is a game changer for them. You know what I mean? So it depends on the size of the company and all that kind of stuff. But that's kind of what's going on in Azure right now in terms of some of the things to think about in cloud native.
Yes. So the next question is, when we're moving to the microservices app, so what are the metrics for me to understand this is the time for me to migrating to the microservices architecture or microservice-based implementation? So what metrics I'm looking for, and when those metrics or when those alerts are generated for me, so when I move to the microservices environment. So any recommendation for everyone who's listening to us?
I think it's more of a higher level consideration. I think I think the metrics obviously are going to be important in monitoring, but I think it's going to be hard to look at that kind of data and then be like, oh, it's time to go to microservices. I think what it is, like take Amazon, for example, one of the major players that popularized this pattern going back a long time ago, right? What it does for you as an organization, right? Especially like at a place like Amazon, they can have these small teams focus on a service and they can onboard developers to that team. They just need to know the specific code base for that service. The service could be implemented using whatever tech the team wants. So if they want to do Node.js or they want to do PHP or they want to do .NET, they can do that because they're just exposing interfaces to other services, right? So I think that's really the bigger consideration, stuff like that, where you're having trouble scaling, you're having trouble releasing this monolithic app and it's taking forever, or it's it's so temperamental that you can only do releases once every quarter or something, So all those operational team considerations to me are probably the driving factor in this.
Okay. And next question, when you're moving to the microservices architecture for the past, before the containers, there's not going much debates around microservices or monolithic architecture. Mm-hmm. We're just simply moving to the 3-tier architecture that have the web interface, database, and APIs, and these kind of things. Ever since the Docker came into the existence and the container came into the picture, there is a huge debate is coming out of the industry that microservices go to the platform. So how containers fit into this architecture of migrating from monolithic apps to microservices architecture? How Docker or containers help me with that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's an important distinction as well, because technically, I mean, if you think about it, you really could build a microservices architecture on VMs. You would never want to really do that. And here's why we do containers, right? They're insanely small, portable, and fast to spin up. They give us a lot of the isolation that VMs do without all the baggage of needing a bunch of memory to virtualize an OS, waiting for the thing to boot up. It takes 3 to 5 minutes, that kind of stuff. With the containerized app, you're literally just saying, hey, start my application. And there's no boot sequence. There's no licensing some kind of OS. It's insanely game changing, like once you get into it. And so the idea would be, instead of having that 3-tier architecture, maybe you have a web front end service, right? And you have a cluster of machines running something like Kubernetes. Now you could run that container as many instances as you want across that whole fleet of servers in the cluster. So instead of building virtual machines and sitting behind a load balancer and paying a bunch of money, you can reduce your costs. You can increase your deployment frequency and time, and it's a total game changer. It allows you to go much faster than you ever did before.
And actually, ever since we have difficulties around 1990s to 2000, we have a limited option of running more than one app in a one machine. So ever since the VMs came into the picture, so they have a way to run many apps on one hardware or one infrastructure or one hypervisor we call. So when Docker and containers came into existence, now you don't even to provision a new infrastructure. You just have the same operating system there. Then you have a virtualize on top of it. And then it's run many apps on top of that operating system. So kind of the virtual machine doing the things of virtualizing the hardware. So the containers are now virtualizing the operating system. But when virtual machines came in, they have 3 things after that coming. One is called compute, network, and storage. And that's another same shift to the container is happening. So it's a container is now existed, and now people are doing solution for compute, network, and storage. So is any container service or container networks interfaces or container storage interfaces just provided by Azure itself, or it has some integrated support from third-party provider like Cilium NetDriver from Cilium or Calico, or storage driver from NetApp or Ceph or Roku, or any other kind of thing? And also on top of that question, when we are using container, we have concern about we have a broken images, we have broken images there. So we want to test those images that up. So do Azure have some support for some open source tooling like Trivi or Anchor or any other kind of things?
Yeah, it's a really interesting time because it's all a moving target. But to answer your question, there's a ton going on in not only Azure, but everywhere else in terms of integrations with Cloud Native. So yes, there is all kinds of integrations with different storage drivers, networking. And what I would do for anybody listening, because it also depends on when you listen to this, about what's going to be supported. It's in the documentation. They talk about all their integrations. And it's still pretty early, right? I've heard a lot of people, not a lot, I've heard some people, kind of grumbling and frustrated with this because it's a learning process and maybe things aren't where they want it to be yet. But everybody needs to realize that this is, we're in the middle of the beginning of the 4th industrial revolution. This is the very beginning of this. The whole world is changing. The technology landscape is changing. And it's going to be a moving target for a while. So, I think that we'll see over time more and more integrations, and also less and less people building their own Kubernetes clusters and using more managed services. And we're already seeing that happen, right? With AKS and the stuff's going on over at Google and AWS. And who knows, will Docker even be the container runtime everybody's using 6 months from now, right? So there's a lot of questions right now. The good news is, it's early, and that's a huge opportunity for anybody that wants to get in this space. Because here's the truth. Most people, if you look at the grand scheme of things numbers-wise, most people are new to this. The vast majority of people are brand new to this. So it's a massive opportunity for anybody that wants to get in the game.
And also the question pop up in a lot of the people mind that we have so many options to run Kubernetes or orchestration technologies like So we have AKS, we have GKE, we have AKS, EKS, GKE, and we might have PKS or WKP, and we have so many options there. So when I want to run my apps on AKS, or how do I figure out that this app is fit very well into the AKS rather than other options?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think people need to do plenty of testing, but kind of going back to what you brought up a little bit earlier, I forgot to mention, your deployment options are almost endless in this world. And so when it comes to doing like testing, staging, all that kind of stuff, QA, we have a pretty cool, even though we're doing like a monolithic apps and stuff in app service, we've got pretty sophisticated build and release processes where, we can test stuff. It's not public in Azure and then decide, all right, we're going to bring that into production. And so like if you're doing deployments, you're just doing everything on Azure DevOps and GitHub Actions are just really nice ways to, when code gets checked in, you can go off and build container images. You can scan them, during those times for security reasons and stuff like that. Azure does have the container registry as well. So if you want to put your images close to your infrastructure, you can totally do that. The container registry in Azure, like running your own custom Docker registry, right? It's insanely cool because it's got all these hooks in it. Like you could do these automation hooks. So when images get pushed, you could fire off all this workflow logic. It's just really cool, man. So yeah, when it comes to deployments and getting your code deployed, there's like endless options. And what I would do is, start small. The documentation for Azure is really good. And pretty much every service has a quick start. And they're like, here's a hello world kind of example. And but usually what I've found is the ones from Microsoft gives you a pretty good look, and you can start to realize that, oh, okay, this is how I would do a deployment with GitHub Actions or Azure DevOps. Here's how I would hook into ACR, all those things. So yeah, the documentation would be Microsoft's documentation is hands down the best Azure book there is. And this is coming from a guy that just wrote 2 Azure books over the last 2 years. So yeah, you can't go wrong with docs.microsoft.com.
And also, it's a very, and also I think Azure and Microsoft, they also have programming languages like .NET, C or other languages. And when you are already a .NET or C# developer, so it's an easier roadmap for you to deploy stuff into the AKS or Azure Kubernetes services, or .NET. Azure already know how to build and deploy a .NET and C# based application. And there you find a ton of community if you get into trouble moving along the way. So my recommendation from me, because I'm also a .NET developer for a long time, 3 or 4 years. So whenever I want to deploy some .NET or Azure, Microsoft programming languages stuff, so I go to the Azure because this is a go-to good platform to me. So it's a good way of thinking, Mike, or you can add things up on that, what I have said.
Yeah, I'll just add that, obviously since Microsoft is the creators of the .NET framework, there's a ton of first-class support for .NET. However, it can kind of start to seem, if you're not a Microsoft person, like they only support .NET, and that's actually not the case. All of their services actually support pretty much all the popular frameworks that are out there. And so there's no requirement to run .NET inside your apps, and you can use any framework. And, honestly, there's so many things out there now. I've seen people running all kinds of interesting stuff, Flask, doing stuff in Python, and obviously Node.js is huge, and there's just endless frameworks these days. So yeah, .NET's not the only one. And, you can run pretty much anything you want, especially inside a container in Kubernetes or an AKS. And then App Service has certain frameworks that it supports, but it's a ton of stuff, just goes on and on. So, outside that, what I would say is if you're new to programming and you want to get into building web apps and stuff, I would say .NET Core is really cool, but, I don't know if it's the first place that I would start if I was a brand new programmer. I would probably just start with JavaScript and, HTML and CSS, learn how to build the front end. Then you can take your JavaScript knowledge and figure out how to build a back end with like Node.js. And then I think that's an easy way to get going. I'll probably get a lot of feedback for that, but it's okay. I'm a .NET guy. I've been doing .NET since it came out. So I think it's great. But I think if you're a newbie, is probably not the place to start, would be my recommendation.
Yes, and also is everything. Microsoft has a very good tooling for developers, like they have VS Code,
That's
and
true.
also when you go to the AKS, they have a tremendous amount of updates coming up for developers. They can dig into what happening inside the replica or deployment or ingresses. So they have a very good developer friendly workflow for them.
That's true.
And also, so just to switch gears up here, so I go to the certification. So where the Azure Cloud Native stuff or the container stuff is going to be present when you want to go to for the certification. Which certification does have container or AKS requirement that you have to be familiar with if you are going to the certification?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's another moving target. Microsoft certifications has been something I've been chasing for like the last 3 years, trying to figure out what's on the exam and what are they doing now. To be honest, they're changing stuff a lot, almost too much right now, and it's because of the time that we're in. It'll slow down eventually. But to answer your question, what I would do if you're getting certified, I know from experience that in the solution architect certification track, you'll need to know how to build container images. You'll need to know a little bit about AKS. And what I can say 100% from what I've seen so far, you don't need to be a Kubernetes expert by any stretch. You should have some exposure, right? You should get the idea, but you don't need to be like writing YAML manifests and going into the guts of like Kubernetes. That would be something outside the Microsoft ecosystem where you would go to like the CNCF and get a CKA certification, Certified Kubernetes Administrator, or CKAD, Certified Kubernetes Application Developer. Those ones, that's from the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, who manages the Kubernetes project, right? The open source project. Those ones are hardcore. In the Azure world, like the developer exam, the solution architect exam, the DevOps exams, those ones are going to expect that you know containers and a little bit about Kubernetes. And there may be more. So what I would say is like, if you're getting certified, find the exam page, go into the skills measured, which is like what's going to be on the test, and then just audit it. Because again, if you're listening to this in 6 months, it might be completely different. You know what I mean?
Yes, definitely.
It happens a lot.
Yes, that's make container and Kubernetes so attractive because it's keep on updating every time when you look at it's updating.
I'll tell you a quick story that like this is my struggle, right? We wrote the AZ300 book and published that in Christmas of 2019. And like 3 months later, they're like, hey, we're cutting this exam, so you guys got to write a new one. And so I literally had a book that had a 6-month shelf life. That's like the worst pattern for an author. So I won't be doing that again. And just because of this issue, it's a moving target. It's changing so fast. You can't even finish a chapter before it starts to go out of date, man. So that's the world we're living in. And honestly, we have to get comfortable with the chaos, man, because it's not going to stop for several years. And again, what I'm saying here, though, that's an opportunity for everybody listening. It's not a bad thing at all. There's going to be, the world's changing, technology is changing. There's going to be new winners. There's going to be new losers. Decide what you're going to do. That would be my recommendation. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. And also, Kubernetes is doing releases 4 times a year, and there's community is absolutely worried about. That's an immense project. And then they came out last year. They have a 3 releases every year, but it's a very interesting things to have to learn so many things. And also I ask you, Mike, what your AZ303 book is coming out. I've seen that. What it is I think it's covering the certifications.
It's a prep book. So if you do want to take the AZ303 exam, there's 2 tests to get solution architect certified in Azure: AZ303, AZ304. So this book that we just did, it's available on Amazon right now. It is the AZ303 book, so it'll help you get ready for the test.
Okay, and also just to wrap up what we have discussed earlier. So, what's in the roadmap of you in this year? How you target Azure plus Cloud Native and plus Kubernetes as a whole in the whole year? What your current plannings are, and how people's or get ready and this premiere where these other contents are coming from Cloud Skills IO, and we have to keep our eye out there.
Yeah. Yeah. So here's my recommendation going forward for this year and, even maybe next year and years after that is learn the patterns and then think of these platforms as your deployment targets and don't get too wrapped up in one platform. You know what I mean? Because what's happening right now in the job market, everybody's like, hey, do you know Azure, AWS, and Google? Oh, no, we needed somebody that knows all three. And it's easy to get tricked yourself, like trick yourself thinking that I got to be an expert in all these. You just need to know and have a conversation, be able to communicate about, oh, how do I get this cloud native stuff running in AWS and Azure and all that kind of stuff. That's why we're doing the cloud native bootcamp, the cloud skills with two platforms, Azure and AWS. So, you really want to make sure, and I know it's a lot, right? But focus on patterns and practices and build some awareness around the platforms. And then remember that everybody out there is learning, and it's okay to like not be an expert in every single thing that's going on, but focus on the patterns. Don't be a one trick pony and only know one platform, and just let it happen. Take your time. It's going to take a lot of people a lot of time. There's plenty of time. Cloud's not going.
Yes, definitely. And one last question that's everybody asking me in the last few times, but I'm really a tricky answer to the question. So when is the best time for everybody if they already have a developer background and they want to transition to the DevOps, and then now we have a new wave that is coming as a GitOps. Because in the space of DevOps and the GitOps, there's a cloud native the space is ever existing. So we have a DevOps, SRE, GitOps, cloud native. So they are, if you come up with some kind of a patterns of when you go for the DevOps job, when you go for the GitOps sync, when you go for the SRE. So can you summarize a bit here?
Yeah. So, there's the game we're playing in the job market is, it's a marketing thing, right? You got to remember that HR people have terms and ways of defining stuff. And sometimes they might latch on to some kind of keyword like DevOps or SRE. And that might mean something to them that's completely different than what it means to Google that invented site reliability engineering, SRE, So it's like, you got to do the research on the place that you're going. But yeah, I mean, we are moving into a world where everybody's going to be expected to follow software development patterns. So I'm glad you brought up GitOps, right? And just Git in general. Being able to understand the foundations and just the basics of version control is something that everybody in IT should be studying if they don't know it, because everything's going to end up going to a situation where that's how we're going to collaborate. If you want to change something, you're going to be committing a change into a repository, and that's going to flow through a pull request process, and other people are going to look at it. And that's going to be like that for documentation. It's going to be like that for code. It's going to be like that for infrastructure. So it's like, this is the time to get on board and keep an open mind, right? You're going to be talking to people that, they don't know what DevOps really means. And then for them, it's a different, different definition. It's really true, man. So like, you just have to keep an open mind, consider yourself, you're on a road to becoming a developer at this point, and be okay with writing some code and be okay with, Git especially. My friend, Steve Buchanan, who's also a Microsoft MVP, just released a course on Pluralsight last week on GitOps, the big picture. And I would highly recommend everybody listening that has a Pluralsight subscription to go watch that course because it's important.
Yes, definitely. I really thanks you, Glad, because I watched that course last Saturday, and it's a very, very well-defined, architecture course in the GitOps world. And you have to get up to speed when you watch that course. Yeah. So everybody listening to us, go check that out. It's a very useful content. Absolutely. So, so really happy that Mike Pfeiffer is listening to us. Answering our questions. And so just a very last wrap-up question. So we have termed the coin the GitOps. So this cloud native bootcamp or DevOps cloud native bootcamp, you cover any GitOps there or not, or you have plan about it?
Yeah, we do. We have plans on talking about that, and but we are bringing people in that haven't done Git before, so we're gonna be very methodical in that process. So we'll get you there, but it's going to start out with the basics of Git and getting into GitHub and understanding the core concepts of version control and filing pull requests, all that kind of stuff. The other important part of this bootcamp, though, is just transparency and really talking about the industry the way that it is, not the marketing thing, but like what we're seeing in the field and stuff like that. And even the last week is all about, how do you position yourself? That is a very real thing, and it's something that it isn't really out there. People need to understand, like, how do I position myself in this place if I compete for these jobs? How do I show what I'm learning? How do I show my contributions in a way that's going to help me land the job? That's the game we're all playing. And so we're helping people with that too. So we're really excited. I hope that, as time goes on, we'll be able to put out other things, and we're doing stuff on YouTube. So there'll be free content for anybody that doesn't want to join our paid stuff. And I'm excited about the future. It's going to be awesome.
Thank you. And Mike, someone asked me, because because I transitioned to DevOps or SRE on these roles, I get to know these because of you, and really happy that during my career, when I am starting my career as a developer, so I switched to DevOps just because of you. So wow. You are a teacher for me. So I learned so many cool stuff from you. So some people, they are also developers kind of role they already have. They want to switch to the DevOps. So what I told him, just to get to know what are those people who are expert and who are talking about these technologies, DevOps every day. So they give you the track, they give you the direction to moving forward along. So how I switch to DevOps is by listening to your podcast, listening to your content that you put on every day, listening to your videos that you put on YouTube channels. So that's, I recommend it for people to have. Just go to the Twitter or LinkedIn, find the people who are throwing content in the DevOps space and get in touch with him. So they give you the direction when following along. So any recommendation that you want to provide for our listener, how to switch from developer to DevOps role?
Yeah, like start practicing, start doing labs, start building stuff. The big thing that I always talk to people about when they're not happy with where they're at technically, they're not doing enough hands-on. So I'm really serious about this. Like, you need to go into your own account, not a lab thing where it's like a black box and it's like not going to be like what you're going to see in the real world. You need to have your own account, either yours or one that your employer gives you, where there's no training wheels, right? And you need to learn how to manage the costs, and you need to learn how to do deployments and support the infrastructure. It's not easy. DevOps is insanely complicated. It's ambiguous. Stuff's always, going wrong. There's messy code where some places where you go and work. It's not easy. And so you need to start getting in the game, and you need to do that by, on a consistent basis somehow, of putting your theory into practice, and let it be messy in the beginning. I always tell people at our community, like, you're not failing at something. This is just experiments. You need to run enough experiments until you've got the data, right? And that takes practice. And the people that put in that kind of work, they're going to get the good jobs. So my number one question to you would be, how much are you practicing? And that's going to really turn you into a DevOps engineer, whatever we're calling it, in the next 6 weeks, 6 months, 5 years, who knows, right? But that's what it is, man. It's like hands-on. It really is.
Thanks, Mike. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and I really enjoyed the conversation with you. It's my dream to talking to you one-on-one and chatting about this Azure and cloud native stuff. So I forget to ask this last question from you. So we see a GitOps already there in Azure, a service called Azure Arc Enable Service, I think, Arc. And I think GitOps is missing in the AWS. I haven't seen any service related to GitOps.
Right.
So is that true, or it might be I'm wrong?
No, it could be. You could be right. Like, I'll admit, like, there's stuff that comes out and I missed it, and I'm like, oh, I didn't even hear about that. So, I mean, I think you're right. But there could be something out there that we haven't heard of yet. Arc in Azure Arc is still really new, and but they are putting some really cool stuff into it, right? So you can do cross-platform management from a single thing, control your Kubernetes clusters on-prem and in Azure, all this kind of stuff. And it'll be interesting to see where it goes. Microsoft's really impressed me over the last couple of years. When I'd left AWS in 2016, Azure was not like production ready. And, I was pretty, vocal about that with the customers that I was working with at the time. But what I've witnessed over the last 4 or 5 years is they've done an amazing job of closing the gap. Just like you said, their developer support is insanely good. Visual Studio Code is amazing. And they've got an awesome community. I mean, let's face it, they do a really good job of engaging with the community. Yeah, man. So it's those are my thoughts on that. And I really appreciate having you on the show. It's a real pleasure to chat with you. I'm glad that the advice has helped you out a lot. Anybody else that wants to follow along, go over to youtube.com/cloudskills or cloudskills.fm, which is my podcast. We're doing 2 episodes a week right now, at least 1 a week this year. So we're trying to put enough data out so anybody can latch onto something and then go be successful. So come check it out.
Thank you, Mike. Really pleasure talking to you. And it's been everybody who's listening to us, follow Mike Pfeiffer on Twitter and LinkedIn, and also follow cloudskill.io and Clouds and LinkedIn and Twitter as well. So I highly recommend the podcast that Mike Pfeiffer is running. They have more than 100 episodes, and I think I watch more than 50 of them. And I
really work, man. We got like over 100, so you got a lot of listening to do.
Yes. So anytime free time at a day. So I love to listen, and these are all those people who put stuff in the real world scenarios from the Firefox team, from the Azure team, from the AWS team, for the different kind of team. And they spoke about very good things that are very well defined for you as you're moving your career along. So it's a pleasure talking to you, Michael. We hope we can do another podcast. Might be I interrupt you again in future. Might be we're listening. We're talking Azure Arc because it's a very good service out there. I want to learn more about it with you. But I'm really happy. I'm really, really happy that you showed up, and hope anybody who's listening to us find this really useful conversation for them. And at the end, I just ask you, everybody, go to the Mike Pfeiffer Azure DevOps, Cloud Native DevOps Bootcamp that is going to be happening at the end of this week. So you go check that out. This give you the direction if you want to leverage your career in the cloud native space, because cloud native is an ever-evolving ever-evolving ecosystem, and you have a ton of job marketing available for you. So go check that out. And Mike always put a content that is highly qualifiable, and it's one of the best content I've seen the online. So thank you, awesome, Mike, everyone watching to us. Bye-bye. Hey everybody, if you want to keep up what's going on in the cloud native ecosystem, we have a weekly podcast show on YouTube and SoundCloud by the name of Cloud Native Islamabad. You can listen for free every single week. We try to find cloud and cloud native experts, share updates on cloud native best practices, cloud native real-world use cases, cloud native deployment patterns, cloud native deployment strategies. The topics include AKS on Azure, EKS on AWS, GKE on GCP, cloud native architectures, cloud native application developments, containerized applications, DevOps, and automation, cloud native certification strategies, cloud native career tips, and more. So if that sounds awesome to you, head over to the SoundCloud and YouTube and subscribe to Cloud Native Islamabad.